Well, hello, everyone. I'm Janet B. I've recovered from compulsive eating and bulimia, and it is really nice to be here with you on a Monday night. And we are going to talk about, well, I am going to talk about working with others. So if you have your big book, we are on page 89. And the chapter opens and it tells us nothing will ensure immunity from drinking or for us binging as much as intensive work with other compulsive eaters. So first, like it's insure, like an insurance policy. And what do we get? Immunity. Okay, we all remember those days back about 4 or 5 years ago when we all wanted immunity from a virus, right? Immunity, like we're safe and protected. And so they are telling us that we can have immunity against compulsive eating, like forever. And it says, what do we have to do to ensure it, to make sure we have it? Intensive work with others. That doesn't mean, here, take a food plan and call me in the morning and spend, 10 minutes twice a week. It means intensive work, taking someone through the steps, through this process. And it says, carry this message. You can help when others can. You can secure their confidence when others fail. Remember, they are very ill. So I think this is important to remember that if we're trying to help someone and he or she is struggling, and so let's say they have trouble getting abstinent, um, we don't yell at them because they're not bad. They have an illness. And we have to be very careful about that. I've had sponsors who were quite frankly mean to me, and I have to admit that years ago, when I was a newer sponsor, I was mean to some of my sponsees, but I'm not now because if they mess up, they're sick. And we don't get mad at people with brain tumors, right? So we're not mean. And they tell us if we do this work, if we help other people, life will take on new meaning. We'll watch loneliness vanish in ourselves and in other people. We'll have a fellowship, we'll have a host of friends. They say, this is an experience you must not miss. We know you will not want to miss it. Well, I say, how do they know what I'm going to want or not want? How do they know I'm not going to want to miss it? Because they know that if I've gone through this process, my heart has changed. And I'm not the same selfish, self centered witch that I was before I worked these steps. Okay. So selfish, self centered, we change and we don't want to miss it. And I will tell you that there is very little in life that's more awesomely wonderful than being at a meeting, seeing a sponsee who you've taken through the steps share his or her story. And we get to experience that. Um, and it says frequent contact with newcomers and each other is the bright spot of our lives. That's why we meet, because, like, not only do we get good information, hopefully, but it's fun. We just kind of like being around each other. That's why a lot of us are going out to LA next month to the OA birthday party so we can have some like in person fun and fellowship. And if someone has the information for the birthday party, please throw it in the chat. So they give us some pointers. They say, okay, if you want to help someone, don't start out as an evangelist or reformer. So it's not my job to count how many people I've got recovered or to try to change people or to try to change the people in OA who aren't doing it right. I have one role in this world, and that's to do God's will. So it's God's will that I carry this message that's in the big book. Whether someone else decides to do it or not, that's really between them and God, not me. Now, if I try to carry this message to 40 people and not one of them recovers, I may have to ask myself if I'm doing something wrong and do I need to just kind of learn more about how to sponsor. But I'm not responsible for results. I'm just responsible for carrying this message. So all I need to do is make sure that I know this book pretty well, that I'm trying to do God's will so that if he tries to tell me something, I'll hear it, and that I'm willing to invest the heart and the time into helping others. So again, bottom of page 89, it says, we cooperate, never criticize. That extends to people doing things in OA differently than the way we do. We don't criticize them. You know, what I generally say is, my reading of the big book is A, someone else might read it B. Right? We just say what we know, how we understand things, and we don't criticize. It says our only aim is to be helpful. So page 90, they give us some practical advice. So when you find a prospect for AA or a prospect for sponsoring, it tells us a couple things. Find out all you can about them. So I never just, if someone asks me to sponsor her, I don't just say, yes, here, do this. It's like, I want to get to know her. And it tells us, kind of what things we want to know, their behavior. Are they anorexic? Are they bulimic? How badly do they binge? How serious their condition is? Their religious leanings. Do they believe in God or not? If they don't, are they willing to believe that maybe there's a God? It says, if the person doesn't want to stop, don't waste time trying to persuade him. Now, we have to be careful here because I've sometimes seen people in OA meetings and they say, well, I don't want to stop. And I'm like, really? Why are you here? And then if you don't want to stop, and they say, well, I must not want to stop because I'm still binging. And I say, no, 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 no. The definition of an addict is wanting to stop, but being unable to. So if you were able to stop, if you knew that if you took certain actions, God would remove the food obsession from you completely, would you do it? Only one time have I had someone say, yeah, no, I really don't want to stop. And to that person, we smile and we don't try to help them. I am not obligated to convince someone they want to stop. My my duty is if someone who does want to stop and is willing to do what it takes. So it says sometimes you want to wait till he goes on a binge. Why? Why would we do that? We want someone who feels depressed and hopeless. We don't want someone who's at the point where, yeah, I pick up every now and then, but it's not that bad. We want people who say, I am powerless, my life is unmanageable, and I'll do anything it takes. So it says, we ask the person if he wants to quit for good and if he would go to any extreme to do so. Now, if you're a smart aleck like I used to be, you might say, well, I'm not willing to rob a bank. I actually once had a woman say, well, I'm not willing to divorce my husband. And I said, has anyone told you to divorce your husband? She said, no. I said, is your husband abusive to you? No, I love my husband. Like, no one's going to tell you, to leave your husband. No one's going to tell you to rob a bank. But someone may tell you you have to go to a certain amount of meetings and have a food plan and make some phone calls and do some work out of this book and pray, spending time with God. And so if someone isn't willing to do that, um, they're not really sponsorable. Page 58 says, if you have decided you want what we have, and what do we have? One thing. It's at the start of step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, a spiritual awakening where our hearts are changed, where God comes in and does this renovation job. So we're not the same selfish, self-centered people anymore. If you want that and are willing to go to any lengths to get it, then you are ready to take certain steps. If not, please come to meetings, come to this meeting, go to OA meetings, go to any meetings, but don't start working the steps because it won't work. And then you'll think, oh, these steps don't work. And then if somewhere down the line you're really desperate, you'll say, yeah, I tried that OA thing, but it didn't work. So I don't sponsor people who aren't willing to do the work, even if they're staying abstinent. If they time and time again aren't doing what I've asked them to do, I can't sponsor them because the requirements are they're willing to go to any extreme to quit. So it says people shouldn't get hysterical. We shouldn't hysterically plead with someone. Of course, that's what we would be more apt to do with our kids, right? If we have an overweight child, to plead with them. They're saying, no, don't do that. And they say, in fact, it's probably best if someone other than the family talks to them. And page 91, they say, call on him while he is still jittery. He may be more receptive when depressed. We're not supposed to give false hope. I can remember early on, and again, anyone who knows my story, I spent 6.5 years in Overeaters Anonymous getting progressively worse. And I would go to meetings. I never stopped going to meetings. I never stopped getting sponsors. Um, just no one ever told me the right stuff to do. And I remember sitting in a meeting, this was when I was in college in New York City, and someone saying to me, "Don't worry, it'll get better." I'm sure she was just trying to be nice, but she was dead wrong. It didn't get better, it got worse. We don't want to give people false hope. Without the miraculous intervention of God, which these 12 steps tell us how to be in a position to be on the receiving end of it,
So,
we are we are utterly and completely hopeless. Okay, so we don't want to give false hope. So they say when you first see someone, just have a talk with them. Tell them about yourself. Tell our story to like whet her appetite, no pun intended. Ideally to get her to ask, "What do I have to do?" It says we don't moralize, right? No high hilltops. We don't lecture. It says if his mood is light, tell him humorous stories of your escapades. So I'll pull out my humorous story when I was in college and spent part of junior year abroad. And I was staying with my friend at this wonderful couple's house. And everyone was like taking a nap in the afternoon. And we went in the refrigerator. She had a whole chocolate cake. And my friend and I just ate the whole cake. We left no trace of it. And the hostess woke up after and she was like, "Gosh, I could have sworn I baked a cake." And she was totally befuddled. And we were just like, "Oh, yeah, don't worry about it." Um, but like, these are the kind of things that we do. And we do like, kind of, if you're like me, some kind of semi psycho things, or okay, not even semi. Like, I would steal my roommate's food, go get a replacement, eat the replacement before I could get it back, couldn't stop. Um, and it says, describe yourself as an alcoholic, or for us, a compulsive eater. Page 92. Tell him you were baffled, how you finally learned you were sick. Give him an account of the struggles you made to stop, right? Whether it's going to Weight Watchers or, getting a lap band or whatever things we did to try to stop. Then it says, show him the mental twists. Well, now we're a little different than Weight Watchers or any of the pay-in ways. The mental twists which leads to the first drink of a spree. So it says, do this as we've done it in the chapter on alcoholism. If someone is new here and wants to understand the mental twist, or if you're new to sponsor, we have a write-up called The Broken Bridge. And Michelle, can you throw a link to that in the chat, please? So basically, the mental twist is like this. Normally, my protection against doing something dangerous is my memory. So, like, I have a horrible cat allergy stored in my brain, or all these data points of cat-induced asthma attacks. So if I'm tempted, if someone invites me to her house and she has a cat, my memory will scan the data points. You were near a cat, you had an asthma attack. You were near a cat, you got a sinus infection the next day. You were near a cat, you got sick. Generates a thought to run across the bridge to my conscious mind saying, stop, danger, cats will get you sick. My memory protects me. But when it came to food, something was different. Stored in my memory are all these data points of, you said you were just going to have one, but you ate the whole box. You said you were going to eat just have one scoop. You ate the whole carton. You said you didn't care, but you woke up the next morning and you were devastated. And there I go, about to have one bite, one scoop, and my memory does its job, grabs the data points, generates a thought to run across the bridge to say, stop, danger. You won't be able to stop after one, and you will hate yourself in the morning. Except, unlike with cats and everything else, the bridge between my memory and my conscious mind was broken, and that thought couldn't get across. The mental twist is This time I'll be able to have one and stop. Or I'll binge and I'll wake up tomorrow and I won't care. Or I'll start tomorrow, forgetting that that is impossible. We'll eat the whole bag, box, carton. We do care, and we won't be able to wake up and start again tomorrow. So we want to explain this to someone so that she understands. One of the early assignments I give to my sponsees is I have them read the Broken Bridge thing. I go through it with them in depth, and then ask them to give me 2 examples of how their bridge works. So like cats and touching hot stoves, or cats and putting on sunscreen, and their own. And then 3 examples with food of how their bridge doesn't work. They have to understand that mental twist. How when it comes to food, we don't think the same way that we think about everything else. So back to page 92, it says, if you're satisfied, he's a real alcoholic, a real compulsive eater. Dwell on the hopelessness of it, right? We don't tell people, don't worry, it'll get better, because without help, it doesn't. It says, talk about the conditions of mind and body which accompany it. Accompany what? Accompany this illness, which in its essence is spiritual. The body and mind, like the allergy of the body and the twist of the mind, are accompaniments. They're like side dishes. The main problem is that there's something wrong at a soul level with us addicts. Okay. And that's where recovery takes place first. So it says you can talk about hopelessness because you have a solution. And page 93, they say, when he asks you that question, stress the spiritual feature freely. None of this, I don't want to talk about God because then the person may go away. Let them go away. I mean, imagine if I'm a doctor and I have a patient who has pneumonia, and the patient comes to me and I know this person doesn't like swallowing pills. So I say, okay, I'm not going to tell her she has to take penicillin because then she'll leave. Well, penicillin is the only solution to like bacteria pneumonia that I know of. If there's any doctors on here and I'm wrong, it's just an example. Our only solution is a relationship with God. If the person's an agnostic or atheist, it says emphasize they don't have to agree with your conception of God. Now, I just want to say, God has been watered down a lot to, higher power, HP like a little pet hamster I can carry in my pocket. But they're talking about God. He doesn't have to agree with your conception of God. He can choose any conception he likes, provided it makes sense to him. A doorknob does not make sense. The wind, or even like nature, doesn't make sense because nature can't cure me of my illness. Nature is beautiful and something to be admired, but this is about power, right? And even the group can't cure me. No matter how much you all may love me, you can't infuse me with power. And as it says in the chapter, We Agnostics, lack of power. That was our dilemma. So it says he can choose any conception of God he likes, provided it makes sense to him. The main thing is that he be, one, willing to believe in a power greater than himself. And when they use power with a capital P, they mean God. And 2, that he live by spiritual principles. I always find it interesting on page 14, it says, it talks about spiritual principles. My book is in a bit of tatters here. My friend had emphasized the absolute necessity of demonstrating these principles, spiritual principles, in all my affairs. And so I had a sponsee, and she went through the big book and she made a list of all the spiritual principles in the book. And we'll throw that information in the chat also. So again, be willing to believe in a power greater than ourselves and live by spiritual principles, honesty, unselfishness, tolerance of people whose views are different than ours, self-sacrifice. That is a big one. Self-sacrifice for the benefit of others, I would say is the biggest spiritual principle. And we'll talk a little more about that later on the page. Um, they say we don't have to, that we should use everyday language to describe spiritual principles. We don't, necessarily have to like talk about church or anything like that. Basic spiritual principles. No use of arousing prejudice against theological terms. And it says, well, what if your prospect is religious and knows a lot more about religion and God than you do? What can you add to that? And it says, you can, because he should be curious to understand why his own convictions haven't worked, and you, even though you may not be a religious person, why yours work. And this is what it says. He may be an example of the truth that faith alone is insufficient, right? Belief alone is insufficient. To be vital, to be alive, to have a living faith, it must be accompanied by self sacrifice and unselfish constructive action. So I will tell you one thing that I do require my sponsees to do, and that is to every day do some self sacrifice. And making phone calls doesn't count. That's not a self sacrifice. That's a good thing to do. A self sacrifice means making an effort to give up something that I want to do in order to help another person. Okay, now if we're sponsoring, that's different. That's a self sacrifice. We're putting in time, effort. If we're new and we're making outreach calls, I tell my sponsees, like, go do something that takes effort. So I have had people go around the city picking up trash, hopefully wearing gloves. I've had people in the gym wipe down rows of equipment, people going to Target for 20 minutes and folding clothes. If you've got elderly neighbors, that's a place to start. If you've got relatives who are on their own, even better, make an effort to go see them, go do something for them, right? Self sacrifice and unselfish constructive action. That means it helps other people. So it says, we're not here to instruct anyone about religion, but if someone is in the food, then they're not applying their faith, even if they believe in God, right? And how do we apply our faith? Again, steps 4 through 9, where we clean up the wreckage that we've caused and that we do self-sacrifice. So it tells us again, we represent no particular faith or denomination. There are people here of lots of different religions and people here who have no religion at all. It's all fine. It says, page 94, we're dealing only with general principles common to most denominations. And then they say, when you talk to the person, tell them kind of what they're going to have to do, how we had to surrender to God, clean up our past, make amends, live a life where we pray and meditate, clean up the wreckage of our day, and have to help others. And the person should really know, and we should know, that when we're helping other people, they are helping us more than we're helping them. First, they should not feel like a project. No one likes to feel like a project. And it is true, because every time I work with someone and take her through the steps, it comes alive to me in a way that if I just like read the big book by myself, it wouldn't come alive. It's helpful to us. And remember, we stay abstinent by our own self-sacrifice. So working with others is helpful to me. So once we talk to someone, we say, no obligation. It's not, I spent 2 hours talking to you about this program. You cannot go out and get another sponsor. No, they can go out and get another sponsor. When I usually work with someone, couple of meetings, 2 meetings-ish, and then I say, okay, here's what I require. Take the night and think about it. And tomorrow, text me, call me, let me know if you want to work with me. Often people say, I don't need the night. I don't. And I'm like, take the night anyway. And sometimes people will text me and say, thank you so much. I thought about it, but I don't want to do it. We want to give them that chance, and better before they really start. Bottom of 94, it says, your candidate may give reasons why he needn't follow all the program, right? We all think we're different in some way. And it says, don't contradict such views. Just say, you wouldn't have made much progress if you'd been that way. And I had that experience. I met the person who finally carried the message of the big book to me. And she asked me to read the book. And then she said, are you willing to do everything in this book? And I said, no. I said, there's this one amendment I'm not willing to make. And she didn't say, well, goodbye then. She said, she had good common sense. She said, are you willing to trust that by the time you get to step 8, you'll be a different person? And I said, okay. And I guess I was, because I made that amend. It says, on your first visit, tell him about the fellowship. If he's interested, lend him your copy of this book. I think by this point, most people are familiar with this program. If not, if someone's brand new, it is not unreasonable to have a long talk with them and ask them to read the first 164 pages so that they're familiar with this, with what this program is about. If I work with someone who's been around a while, I'll give them something to do before I agree to work with them. I want to see that they have some skin in the game. So I'll usually say, listen to this podcast, write down 3 things that stand out to you and any questions, then let's meet again and discuss it. Then let's do something else and meet again and discuss it. Okay. Now here's what I require. I don't start taking their food till we have till I know they're ready. I mean, at some point I might, if someone says, I'm desperate, can you take my food? But often it's like, let's make sure. And page 95, it says, give him a chance to think it over. It says, you'll be most successful if you don't exhibit a passion for crusade or reform. What were the crusaders? They were people who said, like, do it my way or you're dead. We don't do that. And we're not out to reform anyone, any people, or any organization. All we do is lay out the kit of spiritual tools. That's it. Here's what you need to do if you want a relationship with God. I will tell you what I require of my sponsees. Again, this is, you may decide you want to do this, you may decide not. The first thing is 30 minutes every morning with God. Prayer, meditation, spiritual reading, because this program is about getting a relationship with God, and you can't have a relationship with someone you don't spend time with. I mean, when I met my husband, when we were dating, if he like never wanted to spend any time with me, like I wouldn't have married him. I would have said, you're really not interested in a relationship with me. You don't want to be with me. So we spend time with God. I require a food plan and that it's weighed and measured. And I say, if there's any food that's a trigger food, or you're not sure if it's a trigger food, leave it out. Weighed, measured, texted to me before breakfast every morning. 3 phone calls every day, and at least 2 need to be to people in recovery. And I will give her about 20 numbers. So she's got a fellowship right away to plug into. I usually require a meeting a day. I mean, again, if it's a single mother, like juggling 3 jobs and 5 kids, okay, again, we want to have tact, common sense, and love. But a meeting, and I tell her what meetings to go to. If it's possible, if she's working, I'm not going to say quit your job to go to this meeting. Trying to think what else. Then I just give work in the big book. Did I leave something out? I feel like I did. Any of my sponsees?
Podcasts.
That's part of the work. So we'll go through and
Self-sacrifice.
The act of
Self-sacrifice.
self-sacrifice.
That's it. Every day, that's right. Thank you, Anne Marie. An act of self-sacrifice. And yeah, right. The 30 minutes with God every morning, and rigorous honesty. No lying to me and no lying anywhere. Because if we're dishonest, it won't work. It won't work. So those are the things I require. As you see, it's kind of a hefty list. So that's why I say, take the day and think about it. It says, if he's not interested in your solution, you may have to drop him until he changes his mind. Okay, this tells me when I'm supposed to drop someone. if they are not interested in my solution. If I'm sponsoring someone and she picks up, I do not drop her because first, I have a relationship with her. So I'm probably in a better position than most other people to help her. Um, if she's not willing to do the work, so, I'll dig in and try and figure out, okay, let's figure out what happened. And if she says, well, I haven't been spending my time with God every morning, and say, are you willing to start spending your time with God every morning now? And if she says yes and does, great. She will have learned it's necessary to spend time with God. If she says, no, I'm not willing to do it, well, then it tells me she's not interested in my solution. She may go out and find a sponsor who doesn't require her to do those things. Okay, that's not, once that happens, it's none of my business. But I do not drop people just because they pick up, as long as they're honest and as long as they're doing the work. Because if they are honest and they're doing the work, they're not going to keep picking up. Okay, it says, if he's sincerely interested, ask him to read this book. Don't push or prod him. If he is to find God, the desire must come from within, because that's what this program is about, finding God. So page 96, don't be discouraged if he doesn't respond. Go find someone else desperate enough to accept with eagerness what you offer. It is a waste of time to keep chasing someone who can't or won't work with you. Sometimes people hang on to sponsees for way too long. The sponsees are not doing the work they're asked to do, but the sponsor, either because they really like the person or their ego's tied up in it, or for whatever reason, they keep working with them. No, we're obligated to spend our time well. And if I'm working with 5 people who are refusing to do what I say, well, then what about the other 5 people I could be working with who are desperate and eager? So it says, if someone's read this book, is prepared to do it, we can give them practical advice. It says, be sure he's not trying to impose upon you, bottom of page 96, for money, connections, and shelter. Connections. Sometimes people will want to hang on because they want that connection with a particular sponsor. We don't allow it. People have to do the work. And, they say, helping others, page 97, is the foundation stone of our recovery. My husband's a builder. I should have asked him exactly what a foundation stone is, but I'm assuming the stone, that's the foundation that everything else is built on. Helping others. A kindly act once in a while isn't enough. You have to act the Good Samaritan every day if need be. Good Samaritan was in the New Testament, someone who went way out of his way, gave up his comfort, gave up of his money, gave of his time, gave of potentially his reputation to help someone else. I mean, this is what it tells us we have to do. A drunk may smash the furniture in your home or burn a mattress. You may have to fight with him if he's violent. You may have to call a doctor, the police, administer sedatives. We generally don't have to deal with anything like that. But I think when we see what the early AAs did, it can inspire all of us to be a little less selfish. If I'm watching as much Netflix as I want to watch, I'm probably not working hard enough with other people. Okay. Then they give advice. What if the family member, what if the person doesn't want to do the work? And it has advice for the family. And I think this could be helpful for us if we're living with someone who's difficult. It says the family should be offered your way of life. Should they accept and practice, oh my gosh, spiritual principle, there's a much better chance the head of the family will recover. So if we have difficult people in our house, we practice spiritual principles. First, it'll make the atmosphere more peaceful, and we will be able to tolerate it better, and we will change. And as we change, that often leads to the other people in our house changing. Page 98, they tell us, sometimes people say they can't recover unless or until something, and they say the shortest sentence in the big book, Nonsense. Job or job or no job, wife or no wife, we don't stop drinking, binging, as long as we depend upon others ahead of depending on God. How do we depend on God? We get quiet and we just ask God, what would you have me do in this situation? And if we don't get an answer, and very, very often we don't, we can just ask ourselves, what does love look like in this situation? And we can try to act out of love in every situation. And then they tell us our sponsor's job, burn the idea into the consciousness of everyone. He can get well no matter what. All he has to do is trust God, steps 2 and 3, clean house, steps 4 and 9, and then keep living this way of life. My sponsor says it's the job of a sponsor to take her sponsee's hand and put it in the hand of God. Okay. And they say, yeah, there may be trouble at home. If there is, argument and fault finding are to be avoided like the plague. Well, how did we avoid the plague? We put masks on. We can kind of put a little mask over our mouth and, do one of my favorite prayers, the shut up prayer. God, please keep one hand on my shoulder and the other across my mouth. Okay. Argument and fault finding are to be avoided like the plague. It says this may be difficult, page 99, but it must be done if any results are to be expected. So you're having trouble with food, ask yourself, are you indulging in argument, fault finding, gossip, criticism? It says we have to avoid that or we won't get good results. And it says, again, what we have to do, we have to be sober, considerate, and helpful no matter what anyone does. And it says, we all fall below this standard, but we have to repair the damage immediately or we'll pay the penalty by a spree. So they are telling us that if I am inconsiderate and unhelpful, and I don't make amends for when I hurt people, I am going to eat compulsively. So again, if we're eating off our food plans, we need to look at how we're treating other people. Let me see. Bottom of page 99, remind the prospect and remind ourselves, recovery is not dependent upon other people or circumstances. How many times when I was in the illness did I go to OA meetings and say, I binged because ... And there was always a reason, always a circumstance. Circumstances, how other people act, are never the cause of relapse. They tell us our recovery is dependent upon our relationship with God. And then it says, both you and the new man. So this is an advice for the sponsor, the sponsee, everyone in between, must walk day by day in the path of spiritual progress, always growing. If you persist, remarkable things will happen. Well, what kind of things? This kind of things. When we look back, we realize the things which came to us when we put ourselves in God's hands were better than anything we could have planned. We don't always see it at the time, but when we're in God's hands, it's better than anything we could have planned. I have a quick example that happened to me this past week. Um, I live in North Carolina. There's a retreat they do here every year. I wanted to speak there. I reached out to the speaker coordinator. That was my plan, that I would get to speak there. She listened to one of my podcasts. I thought, she's probably going to ask me to come. She told me, no, you're like too big book focused, and we don't always focus on the big book. We might have like a retreat that's relationships or something. I said, okay, then I'm probably not your person. That very same day, I got an email from someone I don't know from somewhere in Tennessee I've never been, asking me if I would come lead a retreat there. And it just happens that, well, this works better because it's closer to a lot of my sponsees. So like we're going to have a girls' day in Nashville before. The things that come to us when we put ourselves in God's hands, better than anything we could have planned, right? Follow the dictates of a higher power, not the little wimpy suggestions, the dictates, what God wants us to do. That's the condition. And here's the result. you will presently live in a new and wonderful world, no matter what your present circumstances. God can overcome bad, hard circumstances. I have more examples, but I don't have a lot more time, so I'll just carry on. Bottom of page 100, it says, assuming we're spiritually fit, we can do all sorts of things alcoholics, compulsive eaters aren't supposed to do because we're safe and protected, right? It says, early on in recovery, that may not be so. So early on, my work had a pizza party. I sat in another room with my own meal that I had brought from home. Now, I couldn't tell you where the candy aisle in my grocery store is, right? Things have, at the beginning, we have to be very protective. And that's why often, I might tell a sponsee, unless it's absolutely necessary, don't go out to eat while you're working through the steps. Don't plan a girls' weekend, while you're working the steps. You want to stay focused. But it says, what kind of once we're through the steps, we can really go anywhere. And we don't try to shield ourselves. Again, once we're through the steps and recovered, but they're really clear about it that if you go someplace, you look to see what can you bring to the occasion? Can you bring pleasure to those there? Can you attend to your business enthusiastically? But if you're shaky, it says, don't go. So even now, don't go. Had this past summer, I was with my husband and my daughter, and we went to this place where they made, I guess it's a big thing on the Outer Banks. They make these like hot, fresh donuts. And, they're in the car, and my husband was driving, so he asked me to hold them. And I mean, they're right there. And so I just put my fingers over my nose because that smell 2 inches from my face was strong. So, I'm not going to be a martyr and say, oh, I've been in recovery so long, it's okay. I held my nose so I didn't breathe through my mouth, so I wouldn't have to smell it. We do what we have to do. Um, and it tells us, page 102, what our job is once we're through the steps. Your job now, and even early on, it's to do this work, is to be at the place where you may be of maximum helpfulness to others. That's our job. And we change one letter of that in job, and it becomes joy. Our job is our joy, helping others. And then it just gives a little practical advice. It says, some of us keep liquor in our homes. We serve it to green recruits, like new alcoholics. Some people serve it to their friends who are not alcoholic, but some people say we should never serve it to anyone at all. It says, we don't argue the question. So that's like, guys, I'd say that with other people's food plans. I don't tell people my food plan because I don't want people to say, "Oh, she eats that, then maybe I can eat it if you can't," or to say, "Oh, she eats that," and then judge me. Right? We're not supposed to judge other people's food plans. We share it with our sponsor, our nutritionist, and with God. And we pretty much leave it with that. And we just don't judge other people. If someone thinks that a certain ingredient they shouldn't have, okay, this is America, they can think that. But it says we are careful never to show intolerance or hatred of drinking as an institution. And I crossed it out and I wrote sugar, right? Like maybe I can't handle sugar, or I can't handle something. Well, I can't handle cats, but I don't go around saying that cats are evil and everyone needs to avoid them just because I can't handle them. And it says, this is not a helpful attitude to go around saying sugar is bad or wheat is bad or whatever people, think. It says, we are not supposed to be witch burners. Witch burners are people who said, if you're not like me, you're evil. It says, a spirit of intolerance might repel people whose lives we could have saved had it not been for such stupidity. So there's actually saying like we're stupid when we do things like that. Um, and they close by saying, our problems were of our own making. Bottles were only a symbol. Bottles are just a symptom. Sometimes people say, food is what blocks me off from God. And they are saying, no, it is a symptom that you are blocked off from God. And it says, we have stopped fighting anything or anybody. We have to. And if you want more on step 12, come back next week because Melissa's going to talk more about it. That's all I have for tonight. Thanks.